Hello there, it's Suzanne Whitby, Communication Specialist and Storyteller, and today I'm here to share a quick tip for anyone who has to work with other humans. It's a simple tip and you'll definitely have heard it before, but I think it bears repeating. Are you ready for it? It's not only what you say, but how you say it. Obviously, what you have to say is important, but how you say it can be the difference between retaining or losing friends, family members, partners, customers, and employees. Here's an example. We all know that the coronavirus has hit companies worldwide very hard. Businesses of all shapes and sizes are trying to work out if they can get their employees to work productively from home, if they can generate enough work for them to do at home, and they're also trying to make sure that once the corona crisis dies down to the extent that people can go back to work, they want to make sure that people can hit the ground running. For some companies, this means that they have to ask staff to use up all of their leave or their vacation time from 2019. For companies, this has a number of benefits. First off, there's no stress trying to work out how to get people to work from home if their jobs aren't really designed for working from home. They don't have to find work for people who are trying to work from home. And in some cases, the benefit is financial. Companies often have to put aside a pot of money to cover any unpaid leave from previous years. So being able to use all that time up means that they can release some of their funds and be more liquid. So what does this have to do with how you say it? If you had to tell a staff member that you needed them to use up 2019 leave, there are a number of different ways that you could do it. You could, for example, choose to explain the rationale behind the request. You could explain the repercussions of not taking their leave. In some cases, the choice is go on leave for 2 or 3 weeks and let's see what happens, or be retrenched right now. You might then invite your team to help you out and help the company out, and of course help themselves by voluntarily taking their 2019 leave. An alternative approach is this. You may assume that all of your team members know exactly what challenges your company is facing at a leadership or a management level. With that in mind, you may sit down with an employee, tell them to pack their bags and not to bother coming back to work until they've used up their 2019 holiday. End of story. Now, I've had conversations with a number of people who've been on the receiving end of the second example that I've just given. Unsurprisingly, many have decided that as soon as the job market calms down, they will be looking for a new job and a new employer, which is only going to make it more difficult for their current employer in the future. So what's the difference between example 1, where you're potentially going to retain your staff, and example 2, where you're going to lose them in the future? I would like to argue that in addition to content, it's also about how you say it. If you need to have a conversation like this, or indeed any conversation, right, this applies to all types of communication, I'd strongly advise you to think not just about the what, but also the how. How you say something, how you communicate your message has many different elements. Here are a few for you to think about when you're planning your next communication. In addition to thinking about what you want to say, you also need to consider your non-verbal communication. For example, tone, speed, your volume and pitch. You need to think about your body language. You need to think about your gestures and your eye contact. You need to think about the location that you're going to be in when you're delivering your message. Is it an intimate conversation in a meeting room, or is it a passing remark in the corridor? Are you lucky enough to have a face-to-face conversation? Are you trying to communicate via video conference, audio-only call? What about text messages and email? They all have different pros and cons, and some are more or less appropriate depending on what you're trying to communicate. Think about your audience and how you're going to deliver your message. Are you speaking to somebody one-on-one? Is it a small group? Are you speaking to the whole company or a massive conference venue? Think about your choice of words. Wherever possible, choose simple, clear language that everybody understands. Jargon and sentences and idioms that require people to read between the lines isn't a good idea. Think about the language itself. Should you be speaking colloquially, or do you need to be formal? Would dialect be the best way to get your message across and really connect with people? Or do you need to think about professional, third-person, corporate speak? Think about culture. It could be your company culture or the culture of the people that you're talking to. Regardless, culture affects how you're going to be communicating something. For example, is eye contact acceptable in the culture? Is touch acceptable in the culture? Is there a very strict hierarchy? You need to take all of these things into consideration. And what about communication style? If you're in a one-to-one conversation with somebody, what words do they tend to use? For example, when you're talking, do they say things like, I see what you mean, I hear what you're saying, I feel that, or I think I understand what you're saying? These are all indications of how a person's brain is wired, how they think. And if you're able to use the same sort of language when you're communicating with them, you have a better chance of connecting and resonating and making sure that your message isn't just heard, but that it sinks in. I think I'll stop there. This was intended to be a very short tip, but now we have 8 things to consider and it's getting a bit long. So let's talk about the bottom line. Generally speaking, we don't think much about the how of our message, particularly when there is a crisis or we're under stress or in everyday conversations. Our miraculous brains step in and they consider all of these little elements and they deliver the message. Sometimes it goes brilliantly, sometimes not so brilliantly. The good news is that if you take time to be more mindful about the how of your message, in addition to the what, taking into account some of the elements that I discussed earlier, you'll be able to communicate clearly, concisely, and effectively most of the time. I say most of the time because people are fascinating, curious characters, and there are no guarantees when it comes to communication. And the result? That'll make life easier for you now and hopefully in the future. If you need a little remote coaching or somebody who can help you work out what your message is and how best to deliver it, I'd love to help. Feel free to get in touch. And on that note, I will say that's it for today, and I'll see you soon. Cheers!